In 1922, one of the most influential minds in the history of psychology did something that, on the surface, looked like career suicide. Carl Jung walked away. Not from his work, from the world. He traveled to a quiet patch of woods near Lake Zurich, and there, stone by stone, he began building a tower. No electricity, a private office with a lock only he held the key to. Every morning he would rise at 7, and by the time the sun was fully up, he had already spent 2 undistracted hours writing. Then he'd meditate. Then he'd walk through the trees. Here's the part that doesn't make sense at first. Jung wasn't retreating to escape his work. He was retreating to make it better. He was preparing to do something almost unthinkable at the time, to challenge Sigmund Freud, the towering figure who had been his mentor and friend. To outthink the most famous psychologist alive, Jung understood he needed something the noisy, demanding city of Zurich could never give him. He needed to think deeply, without interruption, for hours. And that quiet stone tower by the lake, it might be the single most important idea for your career, your mind, and even your happiness in the entire 21st century. Because what Jung discovered by accident, a computer scientist named Cal Newport spent years proving on purpose, and what he found is a little unsettling. The exact skill that made Jung, Newton, Darwin, and nearly every great mind in history extraordinary is the same skill that is quietly disappearing from your life right now. You're losing it. Most people already have, and almost nobody has noticed. So let me ask you something before we go any further. When was the last time you focused on one single thing, no phone, no tabs, no quick glances at a screen, for a full 90 minutes? For most of us, the honest answer is genuinely hard to remember, and that fact alone is worth more than any productivity hack you've ever heard. Let me show you why. There's a name for what Jung was doing in that tower. Newport calls it deep work, and his definition is worth slowing down for because every word earns its place. Deep work is professional activity performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that pushes your mind to its absolute limit. Work that creates new value. Work that sharpens your skill. Work that is genuinely hard for anyone else to copy. Now here's its shadow, its opposite, the thing most of us actually do all day. Newport calls it shallow work. The emails, the status meetings, the little logistical tasks you can do while half distracted, half checking your phone, half listening to a podcast. Work that feels busy but creates almost nothing of lasting value. Work that anyone could replicate. And here is the quiet tragedy of modern life. A study by McKinsey found that the average knowledge worker now spends more than 60% of their week on electronic communication and internet searching. Nearly 30% on email alone. Read that again. Most of our working lives are now spent in the shallows. But it gets worse, and this is the part that should genuinely make you sit up. Newport argues that spending too much time in shallowness doesn't just waste your day. It permanently damages your ability to go deep at all. Every time you flee a moment of boredom by reaching for your phone, you're not just losing that moment. You're training your brain to crave the escape. Until one day, even when you desperately want to concentrate, you simply can't. So the ability to focus is vanishing, which brings us to the strangest twist of all. At the exact moment this skill is disappearing, it's becoming the most valuable thing you can possess. Newport calls this the deep work hypothesis. Deep work is becoming increasingly rare at precisely the same time it's becoming increasingly valuable. And that collision creates one of the greatest opportunities of our lifetime. Because if almost everyone is losing the ability to focus, then the handful of people who protect it aren't just a little ahead. They're playing an entirely different game. Let me prove it to you with a real person. Meet Jason Ben. A few years ago, Jason was a financial consultant, and he was miserable, bored out of his mind. One day he had a realization that would terrify most people. He looked at his job and understood that the bulk of it could be replaced by a simple Excel macro. A few lines of code could do what he did all day. So he decided to become a programmer, reinvent himself entirely. There was just one problem. He couldn't focus at all. When Jason actually tracked his time, the number was staggering. He was spending up to 98% of his workday surfing the web. His attention was shattered, and you can't learn something as demanding as programming while your mind scatters every 90 seconds. So Jason did something drastic. He locked himself in a room, no internet, just textbooks, note cards, and a highlighter. And at first it was brutal. His brain, addicted to distraction, fought him. But slowly, painfully, he trained it. First 1 hour of real focus, then 2. Eventually, he could sustain 5 or more disconnected hours of deep concentration in a single day. Then he enrolled in a brutal, unforgiving coding boot camp. And Jason, the guy who couldn't focus for 90 seconds, graduated at the top of his class. In about 6 months, he went from a bored consultant to a software developer earning $100,000 a year, more than double his old salary. Not because he was born gifted, but because he rebuilt one skill everyone else was throwing away. That's the promise sitting at the center of all this. But to really understand why deep work is so powerful, we have to answer a simple question. Why does focus create so much more value than distraction? The answer lives inside your brain, literally. When you practice a skill with intense, undistracted focus, something physical happens. Scientists have found that focused practice fires specific neural circuits over and over. And when you fire the same circuit repeatedly, tiny cells wrap it in a layer of fatty insulation called myelin. Think of it like insulation around an electrical wire. The more myelin, the faster and cleaner the signal, the better you get. But here's the catch that changes everything. This only works when your attention is isolated on one thing. When you're distracted glancing at messages, flipping between tasks, you're firing too many circuits at once. The insulation never forms properly. As one researcher put it, to be great at something is simply to be well myelinated, and distraction physically prevents that from happening. So focus isn't just a nice habit. It's the biological price of admission for becoming excellent at anything. But there's a second, sneakier enemy. And once you understand it, you'll never look at just checking your email real quick the same way again. A researcher named Sophie Leary discovered something she called attention residue. When you switch from one task to another, a piece of your attention stays stuck on the first one. It clings. It lingers. So when you glance at your inbox in the middle of important work and then return, you're not actually back. Part of your mind is still snagged on that email. Your performance quietly craters and you don't even feel it happening. This is why working in a state of semi-distraction, the way most of us work all day, is so devastating. You think you're multitasking. What you're really doing is guaranteeing that everything you produce is a little worse than it could have been. Newport captures the whole thing in a simple formula. High-quality work equals time spent, multiplied by intensity of focus. Not just hours. Hours times intensity. Which means the person who works with ferocious concentration for 3 hours can crush the person who drifts distractedly for 10. You can see this in someone like Adam Grant, who became the youngest full professor at Wharton. His secret wasn't superhuman hours. It was batching. He would stack all his teaching into one part of the year, then isolate himself for 3 or 4 days at a stretch, out of office responder on, door effectively closed, and just write. In a single year, he published 7 academic articles and a best-selling book. Same amount of time as his peers. Radically different intensity. Now, at this point, you might be thinking of a counterexample. What about someone like Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter and Square, a billionaire whose entire day is a blur of interruptions and meetings? Doesn't he prove focus doesn't matter? It's a fair question, and Newport doesn't dodge it. His answer is precise. Dorsey is a high-level executive, and for a tiny handful of roles like his, being constantly interrupted is the job. His value is being a hard-to-automate decision engine. And this is crucial, you cannot copy that. Those roles are rare and shrinking. For virtually everyone else, distraction isn't a sign you've made it. It's the thing holding you back. So if deep work is this valuable, we arrive at a genuinely puzzling question. Why is the entire modern workplace designed to destroy it? Walk into almost any big company today and you'll find open-plan offices with hundreds of people packed together. Instant messaging pinging every few minutes. Pressure to be constantly available, constantly responsive, constantly online. Facebook once built the largest open floor plan in the world, over 3,000 people in a single room. Newport calls this what it is, an absurd attack on concentration. But why? Why would smart companies do the exact opposite of what works? The answer is quietly brilliant, and Newport calls it the metric black hole. The truth is, it's almost impossible to measure the cost of distraction. You can't put a number on the great idea you didn't have because you were interrupted. And when something can't be measured, it gets ignored. Consider what happened when one executive, Tom Cochran, actually tried to measure it. He tracked his own email for a week and found he was handling around 160 messages a day. Then he ran the numbers across his whole company. The finding was jaw-dropping. His organization was spending over $1 million a year just on the time it took to process email. The soft cost, as he put it, of a small company jet. And it took an elaborate study just to see a cost that had been invisible the entire time. Because nobody sees these costs, distraction survives on pure habit. People default to whatever is easiest in the moment, responding instantly feels productive. And in the absence of real ways to measure value, people fall back on the oldest proxy there is, looking busy. If you're visibly active, replying fast, always in meetings, you must be valuable. Right. Marissa Mayer, when she ran Yahoo, famously checked the company's server logs to see who was logging in remotely, and then banned working from home. The message was clear. If you're not visibly busy, I'll assume you're not productive. Compare that to the physicist Richard Feynman, one of the great minds of the 20th century. Feynman had a strategy he cheerfully called active irresponsibility. He tell people he was terrible at committees and administrative work, that he was simply irresponsible, so they'd stop asking. Why? To protect long, unbroken stretches for real physics. As he understood it, clarity about what matters provides clarity about what does not. And that's the quiet gift hidden inside all this dysfunction. Because the modern world is so bad at protecting focus, anyone who learns to protect their own is handed an enormous advantage. The failure of the many becomes the opportunity of the few. But there's still one piece missing, because knowing something is valuable and rare isn't always enough to make us change. We need something more. We need it to matter to us. And this is where the story becomes genuinely beautiful. There's a blacksmith named Rick Furrer, and once, for a documentary, he set out to recreate a Viking-era sword using techniques that were 1,500 years old. Picture him in his barn at the forge, the metal glowing. The early stages are described as terrible 8 straight hours of controlled, careful hammering. Too hard and the blade cracks, too soft and it's worthless. He has to feel his way through, gentle and precise, hour after hour. And then finally, it's ready. He plunges the glowing blade into oil and it ignites, bursting into flame. And Furrer lifts the burning sword into the air, and his face, according to those who watched, was lit up with something close to awe. Then he said something that stays with you. He said, to do it right, it's the most complicated thing I know how to make. And then I don't need a sword, but I have to make them. He doesn't need it, but something in him has to make it. That is what deep work does to a human being. And Newport argues this feeling isn't reserved for blacksmiths. It's available to all of us, and he proves it 3 ways. First, your brain. A science writer named Winifred Gallagher, after a frightening cancer diagnosis, discovered something that changed her life. Who you are, what you think and feel and love, is quite literally the sum of what you focus on. Your attention builds your reality. Focus on the diagnosis and life feels dark. Focus on the small good things: a walk, a conversation, an evening drink, and the very same day feels warm. Deep work fills your mind with something rich and important, crowding out the petty, anxious, shallow concerns that otherwise leak the meaning out of your days. Second, your happiness. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent years paging people at random, asking what they were doing and how they felt, and he found something counterintuitive. Our best moments usually come not when we're relaxing, but when we're stretched to our limits doing something difficult and worthwhile. He called it flow. And here's the strange part: people are often happier at work than in their free time, because work has built-in goals and challenges. Deep work is practically a machine for producing flow. And third, meaning itself. Two philosophers argued that the modern world can feel empty, drained of purpose. Their proposed cure was craftsmanship, the idea that meaning isn't something you have to invent. It's already present in skilled work, waiting to be discovered by anyone who brings enough care and skill to the task. And this is the part that matters most. You do not need a rarefied job. You need a rarefied approach to your work. A programmer writing beautiful, elegant code can find the same meaning as Führer holding that burning blade. So now we know, deep work is valuable, it's rare, and it's deeply meaningful, which leaves the only question that really matters. How do you actually do it? Because here's the trap most people fall into. They hear all this, they feel inspired, and they decide starting tomorrow they'll just focus harder. They'll rely on willpower, and they fail. Every single time, there's a reason. Willpower is finite. It's like a muscle that tires as you use it. Researchers studying hundreds of people throughout their days found that we spend a huge portion of our waking lives resisting desires, the urge to take a break, check a message, surf the web. And we lose that fight about half the time. So if your entire plan for focusing depends on winning a willpower battle you're destined to lose, you've already failed. The solution is to stop relying on willpower and start building systems, routines and rituals so ingrained that focus requires almost no effort to begin. The first step is choosing how deep work fits into your life. Some people go monastic, radically eliminating distraction, like the computer scientist Donald Knuth, who essentially stopped using email in 1990. Some go bimodal, like Jung, splitting their life into deep retreats and connected periods. But for most of us, the most practical approach is rhythmic, turning deep work into a daily habit at a set time. Think of Jerry Seinfeld. As a young comedian, he gave another comic a piece of advice. Write jokes every single day, and each day you do, put a big red X on the calendar. Soon you'll have a chain of X's, and then your only job becomes simple: don't break the chain. Or consider Brian Chappell, a PhD student drowning in a full-time job and a new baby. He'd managed to write just one dissertation chapter in an entire year. Then he committed to a rhythm, writing every morning from 5:30 to 7:30 before the world woke up. The result? A finished chapter every 2 to 3 weeks. He described himself as both astronomically productive and, remarkably, guilt-free. Sometimes, though, the ordinary won't cut it, and you need a grand gesture, a dramatic move that tells your brain this matters. When J.K. Rowling was struggling to finish the final Harry Potter book amid the chaos of home, she checked into a luxury hotel suite to finish it. An entrepreneur named Peter Shankman, facing a 2-week deadline for an entire manuscript, booked a round-trip business-class flight to Tokyo, flew there, flew straight back, wrote the whole time, and returned in 30 hours with a finished book. $4,000, he said, worth every penny. The point isn't the money. It's that a radical change of environment can unlock a level of focus ordinary settings never will. And here's a rule that surprises almost everyone. To do great deep work, you must also learn to be lazy. Newport means it. Shut down completely at the end of the day. No sneaky evening email. And there are real reasons for this. Downtime lets your unconscious mind work on hard problems in the background. Sometimes the answer arrives precisely when you stop chasing it. Rest, especially in nature, restores your depleted attention. One study found a 20% boost in concentration after a simple walk in the trees. And honestly, by evening your capacity for real focus is spent anyway. Newport even recommends a shutdown ritual. At day's end, review your tasks, capture anything unfinished into a plan, and then say a specific phrase out loud like "shutdown complete." It sounds silly, but it works because of a quirk of the mind. Unfinished tasks nag at us relentlessly unless we make a concrete plan to handle them. Then, and only then, the mind lets go. But even with the perfect system, you'll hit a wall. Your actual ability to concentrate has a limit, and to push that limit higher, you have to do something almost nobody is willing to do anymore. You have to embrace boredom. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you can't sit in a line, or wait for an elevator, or lie in bed for 2 minutes without reaching for your phone, then you have trained your brain to panic at the first hint of boredom. And a brain like that simply cannot focus deeply when you need it to. One researcher who studied chronic multitaskers put it bluntly: they can't filter out irrelevancy, and they become, in his words, pretty much mental wrecks. Their ability to focus is broken even when they try to summon it. So the fix isn't just adding focus, it's removing your dependence on distraction. And here Newport rejects a popular idea, the so-called Internet Sabbath, where you unplug 1 day a week. As he points out, if you eat healthy just 1 day a week, you're not going to lose weight. The other 6 days undo everything. Instead, do the opposite. Schedule your internet time in advance and stay offline between those windows. The specific times don't even matter as much as the discipline of not caving the instant you feel bored. You're retraining your brain to tolerate the very feeling it's been running from. You can push this further with what you might call a Roosevelt dash. As a college freshman, Teddy Roosevelt had an almost absurd range of interests: boxing, poetry, nature, all of it. He barely spent a quarter of his day studying, yet earned top grades. His trick was ferocious intensity in the small windows he had. So take a hard task, cut the time you'd normally give it dramatically, set a countdown timer, and attack. No breaks, no drifting. It's interval training for your attention. And when you're walking or commuting or in the shower, physically busy but mentally free, try focusing on a single work problem and holding it there, pulling your mind back every time it drifts. Newport worked out entire book outlines and mathematical proofs during his walks across Boston. It's like taking your focus to the gym. Which brings us to the biggest thief of all, the one draining your attention right now, probably within arm's reach. The way most people think about social media and endless apps is broken. They use what Newport calls the any benefit mindset. If I can find any possible benefit to using this tool, then I'm justified in using it. And by that logic, everything stays, because everything offers some tiny upside. But watch how a real craftsman thinks about tools. There's a sustainable farmer named Forrest Pritchard who owned a hay baler, a machine with an obvious, undeniable benefit: free feed for his animals. By the any benefit logic, he'd keep it forever. But he thought harder. He weighed the fuel, the taxes, the time he could have spent raising chickens instead, and the fact that buying hay elsewhere actually enriched his soil. Measured against what truly mattered to him, the health of his land, the baler wasn't worth it. So he sold it. That's the shift. Don't ask whether a tool has any benefit. Ask whether its benefits substantially outweigh its costs, measured against what genuinely matters in your life. There's a simple way to apply this. List your most important goals, personal and professional. Then list the 2 or 3 activities that truly drive each one. Then look honestly at each app on your phone and ask, does this substantially help those activities, or not? This is why serious writers like Malcolm Gladwell and Michael Lewis avoid platforms like Twitter entirely. It simply doesn't support the vital few activities that make their work great. And if you want to test a tool's real value, try this. Quit it for 30 days, quietly. Don't announce it. Then ask 2 questions. Would the last 30 days have been notably better if I'd been using it? And did anyone actually care that I was gone? If the answer to both is no, and it usually is, you have your answer. The reason not to announce it is humbling. Part of what keeps us hooked is the quiet belief that people are waiting to hear from us. But the average person's audience is small, and the sense of importance is largely an illusion. Social media, Newport argues, short-circuits the real, hard work of creating value and replaces it with a cheap, shallow exchange of attention. So what do you do with all that reclaimed time? Fill it deliberately. Over a century ago, a writer named Arnold Bennett noticed that most people treat the hours outside work as a mere prologue and epilogue to the workday, dead time to be killed. He argued this was a tragedy. Your mind, he said, wants change, not rest. It doesn't tire like an arm or a leg. So give your evenings and weekends real substance. Reading, exercise, real conversation, genuine hobbies. Because addictive apps thrive in a vacuum. Fill the vacuum and their grip simply loosens. Which leaves one final battle. Even after all of this, there's a force that will quietly flood back in and drown your best intentions. The endless tide of shallow work. The goal here isn't to eliminate it. Some shallow work is unavoidable. The goal is to drain it down to the minimum. And the results can be shocking. The software company behind Basecamp once cut its summer workweek to 4 days. Output didn't drop. Why? Because the cut disproportionately eliminated shallow work, not deep work. They later gave employees an entire month to work on whatever deep project they wanted, ending in a pitch day that produced 2 genuinely valuable new products. As the founder put it, how can we afford to put the business on hold for a month? And then, how can we afford not to? The first tool for draining the shallows is almost aggressively simple. Schedule every minute of your day. We're terrible at knowing where our time goes. One survey found people estimated they watched 15 hours of TV a week when the real number was 28. So each morning, block out your day and give every minute a job. Not to become a robot the moment a great idea strikes. You abandon the plan and follow it, then rebuild. The value isn't in rigid obedience. It's in the constant habit of asking, what makes sense for me to do right now? Then there's a beautifully clarifying question for any task. How many months would it take to train a smart recent college graduate with no special background to do this? If the answer is many months, it's deep work. It draws on your hard-won expertise. If it's a couple of months, it's shallow. Editing a serious research paper might take years to train. Building a routine slideshow, a couple of months. Now you can see, with brutal clarity, where your real value lies. Finally, protect the edges of your day. A Harvard computer scientist named Radhika Nagpal decided to cap her work at 50 hours a week and strictly limit her travel and commitments, while her peers ran themselves ragged. The result wasn't that she fell behind. She earned tenure on schedule, became a full professor early, and made the cover of a major science magazine. When you set a hard end to your workday and refuse to spill past it, you create a kind of productive scarcity that forces you to protect your best hours ruthlessly. As one entrepreneur put it, develop the habit of letting small bad things happen. Because if you don't, you'll never find room for the big, life-changing things. Which brings us all the way back to the beginning, to Jung and his tower, and to one final story that ties everything together. In the winter of 1974, a young man saw a computer called the Altair on the cover of a magazine, and something clicked. He dropped everything. For 8 straight weeks, he coded with an intensity that's almost hard to imagine working until he collapsed asleep, sometimes right on top of his keyboard, mid-line of code. Then he'd wake and keep going. His partner called it a prodigious feat of concentration. That young man was Bill Gates, and in less than the length of a single semester, that 8-week explosion of pure focus launched what would become a billion-dollar industry. Years later, the biographer Walter Isaacson would say the one trait that set Gates apart from his brilliant partner was focus. Gates, he wrote, was a serial obsessor. That's the whole thesis, alive in one human being, not talent for its own sake, not luck, focus, the willingness to go deep while the rest of the world skims the surface. And that's really the quiet invitation at the heart of all this. Deep work isn't a moral crusade or a personality type. Newport is clear about that. It's simply a pragmatic recognition that the ability to concentrate is a skill, one that gets valuable things done, and one that, almost as a side effect, makes life richer and more meaningful. Everything we've walked through here is only the surface of what Cal Newport lays out in Deep Work. The book goes far deeper into the systems, the science, and the stories. There are careful, detailed methods and examples we simply couldn't fit here. If any of this stirred something in you, if you felt that quiet recognition that your own focus has been slipping away, the full book is genuinely worth your time, and you'll find it linked below. But here's the thought I'd leave you with. The next time you feel that familiar itch, that reflex to reach for your phone the second things get boring or hard, pause, just for a moment. Because in that tiny, invisible decision lives a much larger one. You are either training your mind to flee or training it to stay. Jung understood this 100 years ago, alone in a tower by a lake. What you focus on, quite literally, becomes your life. So the real question was never how to get more done. The real question is the one Winifred Gallagher answered after staring down her own mortality. She said, "I'll live the focused life because it's the best kind there is." The only thing left to decide is whether you agree.